session today on anti-Asian racism in Newfoundland, Labrador. And so this session will run through from now to 5:30, about 1.5 hours. And so we have 4 panelists. You can see that already in the poster here. And so each of you will be given about 10 to 12 minutes for your presentation. And this will be followed by some questions and comments, okay, from the audience, because we have, relatively small audience here. So feel free, to turn on your video when you ask a question, or if you're not comfortable, you can also put your question in the chat box, okay? And so this is a very important issue, and also very controversial issue. And we are in a very unprecedented period of time, right? And especially after the pandemics, we have experienced both the BLM movement, Black Lives Matter, and also more recently anti-Asian racism, and also just look at the news, right? The residential school where many young indigenous children have perished, reminded us this, racism or discrimination, not a recent phenomenon, right? It's a long history, and many of us already know, right? Even as early as 1800, we have this, discriminatory immigration policy. We have the Chinese head tax, right? And so this issue of discrimination reason probably will be with us for a long period of time. So the really important issue here is to understand the current situation of the racism in this country, especially during and after the pandemic, and also the root causes, right? That determine these social problems. And finally, we also need to make concerted effort, right, to identify potential solutions to remove these social problems. And so that's the reason why we come together today. And thanks for the organizer and also the also TESL Association, right, for supporting this event today. And also welcome everyone to join the session. And we also encourage you to participate as much as possible. So again, each of the panelists giving about 10 to 12 minutes for your presentation. You're more than welcome to share your stories, okay, your opinions, your arguments, okay, for this important issue. And then we open up the floor for questions and comments, okay? And just to go over the bios for each panelist as I received, by the time I received the information, okay? First one, Professor Shui-Mei Lee is within Faculty of Education at Memorial University. He teaches in the area second language education and newcomer integration. He also conducted a number of high quality research projects, okay, investigating language and social support for immigrants, refugees, and international students in Canada. And most of them are funded by SSHRC, Social Science Community Research Council of Canada. And Memorial University also published many articles and books in the areas. And also he's the current president of the TESL NL, and also the chair of TESL Canada Children Advisory Committee. Chenyan Zhu, I think is the, hope I pronounced well here, okay, is also immigrant from China, Shanghai, China. Remind me, I was also born and raised in China in a small town of 2 million people. So, he's from the big city, Shanghai, 30, 40 million. So, okay, for higher education, now he's the academic advisor, working in the academic advising center at Memorial University. He holds a master's degree in education. Look like we have a group of educationists here. So I'm the only exception that's an economist. Okay. And she specialized in curriculum teaching and learning. And he's also very passionate about international education here, okay, serving thousands of international students at a memorial since 2011, and had developed in-depth understanding of international students' needs and concerns, as well as universities' vision towards international education. All right. And here, the next panelist is Amy Tam. Okay. Amy was born and raised in Newfoundland. Okay. You're not from away. Okay. And in Grand Falls, Windsor. Okay. Newfoundland. Well, actually, she met her husband, who is a Chinese in high school. Right. And they have been happily married for more than how many years now? 15 years, I guess. And have a son and a daughter. Okay. She has been very actively involved in Chinese community because her family background here, and also serve on a number of Chinese associations, including the Chinese Student Scholar Association at a Memorial as executive in 2003, 2004, and later as executive and English secretary for the Chinese Association of Newfoundland and Labrador since 2019, and fairly active in number of events supporting Chinese Youth Association as well. Okay. And next panelist, I don't have a buyer, so Ting Chen, I assume she is a student, doctor student at the Memorial University, okay, and has our strong interest in this topic that we are discussed today. And without further ado, let me pass along the mic to Professor Shumei Lee. Okay, 10 to 12 minutes. Shumei.
Yes, thank you, Tony. And just to add to Tony's introduction of Ting, Ting's a doctoral student here, and her hobby is photography. And so I hope she will give us a little bit more information about herself when she speaks. So our topic today is anti-Asian racism. We want to talk about it because the pandemic of COVID-19 amplified the Asian hate sentiment among other groups in many parts of the world. Although the situation here in Newfoundland is not as devastating as in some US cities and big urban centers in Canada, we feel the heat, the pressure, and the fear. Newfoundland is predominantly a monocultural place, with roughly 2% of its population being non-white ethnic minorities. Although white people from Europe were not the original residents here, they came earlier than the other groups and so consider themselves locals. And the more recent newcomers, CFAs, come from a ways. I learned this term CFA when I first came here, but I didn't mind. I was eager to learn the local ways of life and to mingle with the locals. In my earlier days here, I once came across a gentleman in a grocery store who was visiting from the US. He curiously asked me if I had encountered any racism against Asian people because he had heard so. I felt a bit indignant and defensive. Certainly not. All the people I had met were extremely friendly and supportive. I was in love with the kind-hearted people and the breathtaking nature, and I felt quite at home. Well, I was still in my honeymoon period of culture shock. My circles of contact mostly work in the university or K-12 schools. It took me 10 years to slowly understand the difficulties of living here as a CFA. When I needed a plumber, a lawn care service, an electrician, a house renovation contractor, and so on and so forth. Behind the local people's polite facade, I felt unwillingness, resistance, distrust, hostility, and discrimination. Most of the time, nothing offensive was said or done, but I felt uneasy and excluded. And particularly as a Chinese since the outbreak of the COVID-19. I will use this incident as an example. During fall 2019 and the whole year of 2020 and until now, I've been dealing with a lawn care service. In August 2019, I had approached them online and asked for some vulnerable evergreens planted as a privacy screen in my front yard. At the time, I didn't know they were called yew trees. So I pointed at those rows of yew trees on my neighbor's properties to the employee who came to estimate the work. The employee told me confidently, "I just have the right tree for you." Without an invoice or further information or response to my repeated requests to see the trees. 4 weeks later, 4 employees of the service showed up one early morning with a crooked spruce and coerced me into accepting it. They left without finishing the job, with the tools and stakes and the wires littered on my lawn, and never returned. My request to replace the tree went ignored. Another 8 weeks passed. In November, I received an email payment reminder saying that I owed them $1,380 for the landscape services they provided. I emailed back to clarify and requested that the crooked spruce be removed so that I could have some yew trees planted in the space. I received the following email as an answer from the owner of the business. Quote, "We will not remove this tree. The tree will only die. However, I can send another employee back to stake and wire." Unquote. I called the business number and asked to speak with the owner, but was denied several times. When I finally got him on the line, the first sentence I heard was not a polite, "What can I do for you?" but an angry bark. "So what do you want?" As if I was making an unreasonable demand and he was scolding an unreasonable child. In the preceding conversation, he yelled at me loudly, "You people don't understand how things are done in my country." I was bemused, shocked, and enraged at the same time. Did it really happen? Yes, it did. So I said, "Your country? It's my country too." I told him that after his racist remark, I no longer wanted to talk with him. Someone will get back to him on my behalf. I hired a lawyer to resolve it, and I got what I requested. Although one of the yew trees they planted went dead and needs to be replaced, I'm still waiting. This racist incident passed for quite a while, but the business owner's racist remark and the attitude of the business still bother me deeply. It is easier to check out the quality of a product or service online if the evaluation is available. However, Business count on word of mouth through local folks to do their business. How can newcomers tell if the business owners are racist? I could resolve the business dispute through a lawyer, but how could I deal with a racist verbal attack without a recording or witness? I didn't know I would need it to fight against a racist in court, so I didn't have a case. I don't want to give people the wrong impression that Newfoundlanders are all racist. No, they're not. As a matter of fact, I have met the kindest and most honest people in Newfoundland. In my first few years, first few months here, especially when I lost my wallet, the gentleman who found it at the entrance of a grocery store went into great trouble tracking me down and returned it to me. During our first winter, before we knew we needed a snowblower to clear the heavy and sticky snow, some of my neighbors cleared my driveway before I even got up. I was constantly filled with warm feelings for the people here. However, over the years, when I got to know more aspects of life here and had more contact with people in various professions and trades, I came to realize that the kindness of most people cannot cancel the racism enacted by others. The term racism can be fluid. It means different things to different groups of people in different historical times. It's easy for us to look back and tell what was racism in history, then looking at what is happening now when we're involved. While large-scale racist attacks in the past mostly originated from racial, religious, and cultural differences and were supported by established institutions and groups, racism today is a bit more difficult to identify as most of the time it may not be in the form of explicit, large-scale discriminations against a certain race. It may not come in verbal or physical attacks. Certainly, cases of direct attacks still happen, and we know it, and we can take measures to fight them. What is hidden and tolerated by most people are the subtle ones. When tradespeople fail to show up repeatedly as they had promised, and you later learn from local friends that tradespeople here do not service newcomers who cannot provide a local reference, that was racism against newcomers. When a grocery store cashier chit-chatted with customers ahead of you and behind you, but maintained a straight face while servicing you, who happened to be the only non-white CFA speaking English not in the local accent, that was racism against newcomers. When you were in a crowd of people who appeared friendly to each other, but someone diverted his eyes or turned his head when seeing your smiling face, that was racism. When business of decent repute provided good service to locals, but subpar service to you, that was racism. When your children felt isolated at school, you had to suspect if subtle racism played a role. Speaking of youth, I'd like to quote the findings of a Baker 2013 study that adolescent refugees, the participants of the study, experienced instances of racism in St. John's. Baker warned that such experiences, I quote, may reflect the possibility that a violent, overt racism is developing in the city, unquote. A 2008 report of the Association for New Canadians indicated that over 40% of white youth in the St. John's metro area felt that racism was a problem at their school. Through my years of school-based research on newcomer students' integration in St. John's, I have to admit that I felt it too. While racism was not the focus of my project, I could tell from the newcomer kids' narratives how they fell victim to racism from peer students, teachers, and even administrators. Such racism was not spoken out loud, but it was felt regardless. This brings us to the topic of teacher education, both in service and pre-service. In our school system, we need professional learning opportunities offered to current educators on working with multilingual, multicultural newcomer ESL students who do not share the Anglo-American background. In our university programs, we need to build anti-racist content into our curriculum so our future professionals are supporters of and fighters against racism of all forms. It is not a comfortable feeling to admit that racism exists in our civilized society, and yet we cannot ignore it. We need to call it out and deal with it. Today, it is anti-Asian racism. Yesterday, it was anti-Black racism. And the day before. The list is long. What will it be tomorrow if we don't do anything? Racism concerns all of us, so we need to make concerted efforts, like Tony said. We need to break the silence and speak out for ourselves, for others like us, and for the betterment of our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Shimei, for sharing your stories and also your feelings about those incidences. Certainly, I mean, Atlantic Canada, Newfoundland, Labrador have been, always viewed as a very friendly place, to live and work. And so such, bland discrimination you described at the beginning of presentation is not very common here, fortunately, but it's certainly more common in major urban centers like Toronto, Vancouver. We heard a lot about that in those days, and the United States. So one of the purposes of this today's session is to actually prevent that kind of more serious incidents from happening more here, right, in the first place. And second, I also agree with you, Shimei, the more subtle type of discrimination, more systematic discrimination appear to be neutral and apply, all the listed rules apply equally sometime, to minority and non-minorities, but do have adverse consequences on the minorities, women, and indigenous people, and so on and so forth. Recently, we conduct our consultation with ANC on the challenges and experience of recent immigrants in the province. We heard a lot of those stories. For example, the better shifts will be given to locals for no reason. When there is a layoff, the newcomers will first to let it go. Okay. And we also heard about, some organizations have screened up job candidates by Newfoundland accent. If you don't have, when you speak perfect English, if you don't have Newfoundland accent, you will not be you'll not be selected. So it sounds outrageous, but it did happen. Okay, so that certainly is a reminder to us that we definitely need to do more to increase the effort and prevent this from happening in this province, in the workplace, in the labor market, in the housing market. You talk about housing market also. We have experienced very different kind of incidences.
Mm-hmm.
So let me know. Maybe should I actually pass this to the floor, and maybe they can. The audience could provide some comments, and probably also they can share their own experiences. Whether you have some kind of incidents in the past, and what's your feeling about it? And this is an area which is challenging. Sometimes sometimes it's subjective, right? It depends on your perception. Some people say this is just a little bit rude. Other people say discrimination. Other people this is racism, right? So that's sometimes we have to get a common sense in this area. Something that is not acceptable. And like what the prime minister said, right? All these incidents that happened in many urban centers in Canada, and some of them just so obvious, not acceptable. Others are more subtle, more systematic, but again, they are not acceptable, even not legal. Okay, so maybe I should open the floor and ask your comments and possibly your stories as well. Anyone?
Tony, I'm concerned of time. Do you think it's a better idea, like if the four panelists finish
We,
our
we could we could do that. Let me just someone if you have
only have
burning
more, yeah,
questions or comments, right?
yeah.
Before they forget about your presentation. I find this is always better way set up for
Okay.
questions,
Yes, sure, yeah.
right? Anybody like to say a few words? Okay, if not, let me pass on to the second presenter. Okay, maybe I should invite Amy Tan. Because Amy, you have certainly the understanding of both uh, cultures and maybe also both languages. I don't know. Okay, right? And I think it would be very conducive for you to share your perceptions, your experiences, and your feelings, and what's your take on those issues?
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I have some notes here, so I guess I could start with those. The first thing I have to say is like I'm not of Asian descent, and therefore I cannot know what it is like to experience anti-Asian racism firsthand. And I do not want to speak for others' experiences or take away anyone's voice. I can, however, offer a unique perspective as a white Newfoundlander who is also a member of a Chinese Canadian family, with my husband who is Chinese Canadian, and as the mother of biracial children who identify as Chinese. As such, I can offer my perspective on how anti-Asian racism, particularly since the pandemic, has had an effect on my family. For the most part, prior to the pandemic, our family has not experienced much overt racism, except the common asking my husband or my kids, "Where are you from?" No, "Where are you really from?" Which is the application of the perpetual foreigner syndrome, which implies that my husband or my children are not Canadian despite being born in Newfoundland due to not being white. The local community has been largely kind and welcoming to our biracial family, just as the Chinese community and members of the Chinese Newfoundland organizations such as CANL, CYA, CSSA, the Chinese Moms Group. They have also been very kind and welcoming to us, and we feel like we're part of both communities, which is a wonderful thing. It's amazing. Since the pandemic, though, there have been incidences of concern by a few locals, which have caused me concern and fear. For those of you who might know my husband, he works on George Street, which is known for its nightlife. He gets off work late and walks about 15 to 20 minutes to his car through George Street and downtown. Several times when he was walking home late at evening, people have yelled things out their car window at him while driving by, such as "you got the Kung flu" or "coronavirus" or other things such as this. 99% of Newfoundlanders would not do this, but there is still 1% that would and do. George Street, as you may know, is also a party street. It's very well known for the bars, the drinking scene, the party atmosphere. And consumption of alcohol is part of the scene, and alcohol can embolden people. Verbal harassment is one thing, but I'm often in fear that he might run into the wrong person who has had one too many drinks or have taken substances and might target my husband in violence. Many times when he would work later than usual, I would ask him to take a cab to his car, but he said that cabbies don't like getting out of line for a short 5-minute drive. The pandemic, recent political climate, and endorsement of white supremacy groups down south, and the rising of anti-Asian racism has certainly been a different experience. And I'm so very sorry for those who experience it on the regular basis. It is not okay. I never thought my husband and I would have to sit our son down and talk about what he should say or do if somebody bullies him for being Chinese or scapegoats him for COVID-19. I never thought I would feel fear that my husband could get jumped while walking home from work or physically attacked or beaten, which did happen to his cousin in Toronto. I think that 99% of the North American population would not engage in anti-Asian racism, but there are 1% who will. I believe that the anti-Asian racism on the mainland has had more incidences due to larger population, and ignorant bigots can easily find others who share their ignorant views. As a white local, I believe that we all have a hand in combating anti-Asian racism, and that with speaking up, and that is with speaking up and shining light on ignorance. If somebody jokes about the Kung flu or shares ignorant misinformation, we need to call them out. We need to tell them it's not okay and it's not a joke, and that there are real consequences to hateful rhetoric. Correct information and share positive information. I'm not sure how many people know that in January 2020, 2 months before the pandemic hit Canada, and before there were mandatory self-isolation rules, Chinese students returning to Newfoundland from China voluntarily self-quarantined. Chinese property owners donated rooms for the students to quarantine away from roommates free of charge, and members of the community brought food and supplies to the students. The Chinese Youth Association canceled their Lunar New Year show, even though everything was ready to go. The children had practiced their dances and everything was ordered, everything was set to go, and they canceled it. And the Chinese Association of Newfoundland canceled their Family Day activities out of an abundance of caution and care not only for the Chinese community, but for the Newfoundland community as a whole, long before any government mandates. This shows that the Chinese community in Newfoundland are responsible citizens who care about the Newfoundland community as a whole and should be recognized as such. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. I totally agree with you. 99% of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are very nice, friendly, supportive. Maybe, only 1%, but 1% is too much, yes. Right? Even one incident is too much. It just, rephrase some of the federal government officers in charge of this issue. So I think in many ways, our panelists, the educationists, it's very, we share responsibility to educate the general public, what is, acceptable, what is not, right? What is the borderline? And so this is really, we're talking about public education and also cross-cultural communication. And that's the reason why I think your experience, your perception, your understanding of this issue are really critical, because you can, actually communicate on both communities, right? And they are feeling their issues. And
actually,
so.
oh, sorry. And actually, when I'm speaking about this and I speak about the Chinese community and the local community, we're actually all part of the Newfoundland community as a whole. Like we're all Newfoundlanders. We're all here, you know, we're all part of the Newfoundland community as a whole. So even though I'm talking about the local community as in like the white Newfoundland community and the Chinese, we're still all part of the Newfoundland community as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amy, again. Anybody from the audience who would like to make some comments or ask questions to Amy? Okay, we have a very polite group here, I know. In the morning, I have a total different group. Okay. All right, so maybe I should pass along to, I think, Chenyan, you are here. So I know you're very passionate about international education. You also provide your valuable service to thousands of international students to, at Memorial University, which I believe is a window to the outside world. It's very important, position to, communicate our position, our value, right, to the outside world. And perhaps you can also talk a little bit about your experience as international academic advisor, but to the students, but also your personal experience, your work experience, and also your personal life, right, relate to this very issue here.
Thank you, Tony. So before I start, Mother, can you do me a favor? Can you teach me how to share my screen again? Is that the arrow? Mother, are you here?
I am. I can't get it. The way I have my screen set, I'm trying to maximize so you see the pictures, and I couldn't find my mute. Sorry. Yeah, on the bottom there's an arrow, a box with an arrow in it.
Okay. Yeah.
Present now, so you should have access to that.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I think it's. So can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so that's great. All right, so hello everybody. My name is Chenyan Zhu. I work in the Academic Advising Center as an academic advisor. So I came to Newfoundland in 2007, and I've been living here for 14 years. I'm a mother of 3 children. All my children were born in Newfoundland. They identify themselves Chinese. Today, I'm going to share my experience and perspectives as a member in the Chinese community here in Newfoundland and as a university staff who works with international students on daily basis. I'm also going to share some of the resources regarding anti-Asian racism. So the ongoing pandemic has changed everybody's life. So how does the pandemic impact on the Newfoundland Chinese community? Let's start from the 2020 Chinese New Year. I think Amy just touched a bit of that. So, so these 2 pictures were taken just 1 week before the 2020 Chinese New Year. The boys were practicing Chinese Kung Fu and the girls were practicing a traditional Chinese dance for the New Year celebration. Our parent volunteers and all kids were working so hard. We had been practicing for almost 4 months until we were notified that all the celebration would be canceled due to the COVID outbreak in China. So everybody was extremely disappointed, but we understood the situation. So at that time, we didn't realize that much worse situation was waiting for us, anti-Asian racism. So from news, from TV, from social media, people started to realize that COVID had brought increased incidents of racism, discrimination, and violence against Asians. I remember in late January, people from multiple WeChat groups made calls to buy masks to donate to China. And I went to Shoppers picking up a few boxes of surgical masks. And when I lined up, I saw another Asian look girl uh, who was in front of me wearing a mask at that time. And I noticed that a couple of people in the store casted a very judgmental look on us, which made me very uncomfortable. And a couple of ladies who were behind us decided to change to another lineup. So meanwhile, some mothers from the Chinese community expressed their concerns about potential discriminations or bullies at their children in school. To help prevent a potential spread of the virus, as well as the rise of discrimination, to build a good reputation of the Chinese community here. So people made calls for self-isolation for those coming back from China. In order to encourage people to volunteer to self-quarantine, one of the group members said he would offer his several rental apartments for free to those people returning from China who wish to self-quarantine. So that's the, the subject line of a news reporting that that group members, just provide the free, free apartments to encourage people, just self-quarantine. And we spontaneously formed a volunteer group to help people in quarantine purchase groceries and supplies and deliver these things to them. So the volunteer group was super active until Newfoundland had the first lockdown in March. Unfortunately, the anti-Asian incidents continue to grow in the US and Canada. So I'm going to show you this data. So this data is shared by the Project 1907. So Project 1907 is an organization that was created by a group of Asian women aiming to amplify the Asian voice, which is often underrepresented or undervalued in mainstream political, social, and cultural discourse. So this national report combining the community-based tracking data to better understand the impacts of rising anti-Asian racism. From this data, we can see that over 600 incidents reported since onset of COVID in Canada. Women are impacted the most, reporting 60% of all incidents. So from this data, Newfoundland occupies very small percentage of the reported incidents. But from the community that we heard about the incidents, I may say we may have heard more than this number. So from from Dr. Lee, from Ting, who is going to present later, from Amy, from my own personal experience, we know the racism incidents exist here. I can feel that people in the Chinese community here are becoming more cautious, more anxious, more stressed, and more frightened. So 3 months now, just before the Chinese New Year this year, 2021. So that was another Chinese New Year. Some people in the community expressed their concerns to put up the Chinese New Year decoration on the front door because they were afraid that they might be targeted. So as a university staff, I heard a few racist incidents towards Asian students and employees as well. So for example, a couple of Asian students and an Asian employee reported being yelled slur by people in a moving vehicle. And once I was called the Chinese staff by one head of another department that we work with. So my supervisor at that time give that head a big lesson regarding racism. Yeah, so, and our director of the internationalization office, Dr. Sonia Kanazan, once discussed with me about why our Chinese students are much less engaging than other groups of students. So we wonder if there was a trust issue behind it due to the COVID and the rising cases of anti-Asian racism. So we don't know the answer, but Chinese students are less engaging than other groups of students. That's the fact. So the positive part that I saw from last year was that working together made us a very strong community. So in the community, people understand, people offer help to each other, people volunteer, we fight anti-Asian racism together. So those are the things that I've never seen before. So next, I'm going to share a few resources about anti-Asian racism to you. So as a parent, I'm not sure if there are any parents here. I asked my children whether they were treated fairly at school. I wonder if they know what racism is. Did their teacher discuss the topic of anti-Asian racism? Do they know how to deal with the racism? I believe that many parents are like me. We are more concerned about our children facing racist incidents. In order to educate my kids about racism, I came across a couple of resources that educate grade 4 and up children about racism. So one is from the Chinese Canadian National Council for Social Justice. So they have 6 videos that help students learn about racism. Topics include understanding race and the racism, types of racism, racism and other forms of discrimination, impacts of racism and fighting racism, what we can do. So they also have 6 posters designed for children to obtain the history of racism towards Chinese communities in Canada and the racism in other different communities. They are very reader-friendly posters. I would highly recommend people who have young children to look at this resource. So Act to End Racism website is another resource that has a web page of talking to our children about racism. It's kind of a one-stop shop web page that discusses everything children need to know about racism. I especially like the part that they recommend a different level of books talking about racism stories to elementary students, junior high students, and senior high students. So these books would help kids explore the real world. I think it is important for children to be educated about racism, and this conversation needs to be open to children. So as a university staff member, I care about students. So majority of our Asian students come from a place that they belong to the society that shares the dominant culture, which means they are not a minority from where they come from. So they don't have much experience dealing with the racist incidents. I found these tips from the Stop Apply Hate website. So this is a resource from the United States. This basically gives us some safety tips when experiencing or witnessing hate. So what should we do if that happens to us? This is a good resource to our Asian students. No matter what happens, your safety is always the priority. It hurts when racist incidents happen to anyone. It may be hard for hard to forget about it, to get rid of it, to get rid of it from your mind. So then mental health support is a key. Mental health support for the Asian Canadian communities and beyond lists a number of resources that people can avail of when they need support. Of course, Memorial's Wellness and Counseling Center is another good resource that students must know. If you are a Memorial student or you work with the student, so if you encounter any students who who may have mental health issues, based on what happened to them, like maybe racist incidents, just feel free to refer them to the counseling center, and this is the contact information. Okay, yeah, and that's pretty much from me. Thank you.
I was just wondering, while you were talking, that was a wonderful presentation, Chenyan. It actually made me start to think when I was looking at the picture on the incidences of anti-Asian racism, and it was showing how women account for 60% of the incidences. And, I believe that women, children, and seniors being perceived as a more vulnerable population would experience higher incidences of anti-Asian racism, especially overtly. But I'm thinking that we don't see the whole picture because I think that many men would be hesitant to report anti-Asian racism or any experiences like that. Like even when I talked to my husband about it, I said, why don't you talk to the RNC or anything? No, that's, that's, like he would brush that off and not report that. So I'm suspecting that incidences of anti-Asian racism actually is greatly underreported.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah. Mainly the model, the very quiet model minority, and we do have the tendency of not speaking out, right? Not saying anything. Like I said, it's the kind of racism normally under the radar. We don't say anything, we tolerate it.
Yeah.
And so, things went unnoticed until it's getting really, really bad.
Yeah, like all the sun, the silence.
You need to speak up. Yeah.
Yeah, silence will, like, the racism like cancer in our society, right? The silence allows it to grow. That's like all the sun, right? So I really, perfectly understand, Chungyan. I sorry, I have muted myself a minute ago. So thanks for your story again, and also your data and your tools for anti-racism strategies. I think this is all well said, and especially I understand that you as a mother of 3 young children, why you take on such a strong stance on this very issue of recent discrimination, right? Because many immigrants, first generation immigrants, they have made a lot of sacrifice, like generations of immigrants, right? Made huge sacrifice and also contributed enormously to Canadian economy and society. Okay, but one important purpose for our migration journey is to pursue better quality of life for ourselves, but more importantly for our children, right? We want to make sure our children will live in a society that is fair, equitable, and just, right? So that's the reason why we stood up, right? Instead of keeping quiet. I know a lot of people are quiet. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, right? They want to be modest. They don't want to confrontations. but the end result is that situation might get worse. Okay, that's exactly we should not. We should not give in. We should not give up. We should stand up, right, against all this bias, prejudice, and discrimination. Okay. So, okay, any other comments or question from the audience? Thanks, Amy, for picking that up. Sorry, I should realize earlier.
I think
Okay.
you will hear really, good story here of, someone being the victim of racism and stood up and spoke out from Ting.
Okay, let me do. So our last but not least presenter, Ting Chen. I'm pretty sure she has a lot of to say about this issue, a lot of stories, and and her opinions on this. Okay, Ting.
Hi. My name is Ting Chen, and I'm now doing my PhD at a memorial as a folklore student. And I came from China. Actually, tomorrow will be my 3-year anniversary of arriving at Newfoundland. So 3 years ago, exactly at tomorrow, I arrived in Newfoundland. Among the 4 speakers today, maybe I'm the one who have the shortest time staying at the Newfoundland. But during my past years here, as a PhD student who are doing folklore field work, and I'm also a photographer, and my photography work has won several well-known international and national photography awards. So I have been doing trips around Newfoundland a lot of times during the past years, both in town and around the bay. So when I'm doing my trips, I'm trying to go to every community that I can find on the map. So I have seen a lot of Newfoundland during the past 3 years before the COVID. So I have met a lot of Newfoundlanders for sure. So I still remember that when I'm traveling around the bay, people are so nice to me. I'm invited to their house, even though I don't know them at all. I'm invited to their house, and there are a nice lady who treat me with homemade cookies and a very delicious beverage, also homemade. And also, when I'm traveling to Fogo Island, a very nice lady gave me a free accommodation for a week. So, and when I'm traveling like in a harbor somewhere, and when it happens, there's a fishing boat just arrived to the bank. So they will give me freshly caught codfish for free. These fishermen are really nice to me as well. So before the COVID, I could never imagine that some racist attack would happen to me or would happen in Newfoundland. That would be beyond my imagination, because I think Newfoundlanders are the most friendly people I have ever met in my life. But I realized that when the COVID began, and when the COVID began to hit Newfoundland, things began to change a little bit. So my first racist attack experience happened in March last year. That was when the COVID pandemic firstly began. So when I was walking in downtown that day, and a car drove by me, and I can see that the window of the car was open, and I think the drivers and some passengers, some his friends, like in their late 20s or early 30s, they were sitting in the car. So when they drove past by me, they reached their heads out of the window and shouted to me, "Virus," and then they just drove away. So I didn't see the car plate because it was getting dark and the car was driving fast. So I didn't get to see the car plate number. If I saw the plate number, I would definitely report that to the police. I was shocked when it first happened to me, because it is the first time I have ever met such racism attack in Newfoundland. And at that time, I thought maybe this is just a rare case or instance that would never happen again. But I was wrong, because the second time I encountered a racist was just 1 month later. So my second time of racist experience that occurred in April. When I was walking on a hiking trail, a man walked past by me and he told me to go back to where I come from, and I'm not welcomed in Newfoundland. So this time I was shocked. I was scared, actually. So after that, I hide in my own place. I didn't dare to go out for a walk anymore. So because all these experiences that happened to me were so traumatic. My feelings are greatly hurt, and I don't want this to happen to me again. So I hide in my place for several months. And until in the late summer, I began to go out for a walk again. And the third time of racist attack happened to me at that time. That was in early September when I was walking in Monty Pond. So I met two teenagers whom I didn't know at all. I didn't meet them at all before. So they stopped me and they began to curse and swear at me. And they say that Chinese are dirty pigs and blah, blah, blah. And the words are so dirty, I wouldn't cite here, you know. So after saying all this cursing and swearing at me, they just ran away. But fortunately, I had my cell phone in my hand. So I was able to take a photo when they were just running away, a photo of their back. And I also report this incident to the police right at that minute. But this time when I came to my place, I think I couldn't hide anymore. The first time it happened to me, I was shocked. The second time it happened to me, I was scared. And now this is the third time. Maybe there will be the fourth and fifth time if I don't do anything. So I decided to share my experience on my Facebook, on the social media, and in several groups I was in on Facebook. And quickly, my experience got the public's attention, and people comment on my post and give me very supporting words and also encouragement that greatly warmed my heart. And also, my posts get shared hundreds of times, so that more people can know that this is actually happening in Newfoundland. But but besides people who are giving me support and encouragement, there are also some people who are questioning me. They say I'm telling a lie because they think Newfoundland is so friendly, such a nice place. People are so nice and so kind. They don't believe racism is here in Newfoundland. They say I must be lying because they can't believe it really happens. Well, for those people, I think maybe they're too naive or maybe they're ignorant. They just cannot realize that racism is actually in Newfoundland and the racists are actually in Newfoundland as well. So they simply choose to deny what is happening and bury their head in the sand. But that definitely doesn't help. And finally, my post got public attention, and the CBC also noticed my experience and reached out to me and asked if I would like to have an interview to tell the public about my experience. And I say, why not? I would like to have the interview, not because I want to be famous, because this is really not a good reason to be famous, but because I want more people to know my experience. More people to know what is actually happening to the Chinese right now, so that the public awareness could be raised, and maybe in the near future, such things could be stopped. So I received the CBC's interview, and I'm so glad they're on articles, they're on radios, even on the national wide, so more people could realize that racism, hate, and anti-Asian hate is really happening here in Newfoundland. It's not a legend, it's not a rumor, it's a fact. And luckily, since then, no racism attack has ever happened to me again. But I know this is not over, because I just heard a few weeks ago that a friend of mine, a Chinese girl, who was also walking in downtown, and a very similar experience happened to her, just as what happened to me. Also, a car drove by her, and the drivers in the car began to cursing and swearing some very racist, words to her, which also greatly terrified her. So, this is not over yet. And I know this is a long way to battle against the racism and to battle against the racists. Just as Amy just said, I know that most Newfoundlanders are really nice people, and I truly believe they're the nicest people I could ever imagine in the world. But there are also a small group of people who are racist, who are haters, and these haters and the racists can destroy Newfoundland by their violence, by their hatred, by their ignorance, and by their intolerance. So that's why I want to join this conference, and also I wanted to receive CBC's interview to share my experience to the public. And besides complaining my own personal experience, I think there are also some things that I could think of to do to prevent. Maybe we cannot prevent instantly, but at least we can help to make this situation better. For the public, I think raise awareness is really important. We should try our best to raise awareness on the issue of anti-Asian racism. And of course, these can be done by media and public event and posters and so on. And CBC definitely did a good job on this because they shared my story to the public. And as to the university and other schools in Newfoundland, I think we can also do something. Because I'm part of the university now as a PhD student, I noticed that before the COVID, when I was still on campus, I saw some posters saying like Muslims are not terrorists. And these posters are very good for anti-racism education. So maybe the same thing could be made for Asian people, like the posters on a campus or in a school saying, Asian people are not a virus, Asian people are not a danger. This will be a good resource and method for the public education. And also I know there is a program called Kindness Program that has been carrying out in Newfoundland schools for several years. Actually, last year, after my bad experience in September, a primary school here in Newfoundland wanted to invite me to their classroom to give a speech about anti-racism to their primary school pupils. But unfortunately, this appointment was canceled because of the COVID. But I know that if in the future, I still have this opportunity to give any kind of public speech about anti-racism to the children, to the primary students, I would love to go there and tell these children that anti-Asian racism is wrong. So teach children and students about respect, love, tolerance, and cultural diversity is very important because we know that racists are not born, they're taught. So if we can teach children about what is right and what is wrong, so they will be less likely to grow up as a racist. And as to ourselves, I think what we can do as Asian people here is to do not be afraid to speak out our own experiences and report a racism incident to the police without no hesitation. So I hope we could have more platforms to log or report these racism incidents in the near future. And I know it's a long battle to fight against the racism. And the racism cannot be gone just in one day. But if every one of us do something, the things will be changed gradually. And I know that we're doing something right now today in this conference. And I'm really glad to be here to share my experience so more audience could see, could hear, and maybe they will join us do something too to help this situation, to make Newfoundland a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ting. And first of all, I think your courage and your stance on this issue, right, to speak up to the police, to the media is really commendable. I know, Chenyan, you also have done this. to the media, especially CBC, right? To increase public awareness. And certainly I think it's very important. Sometimes people just don't think this is, so offensive, even illegal issue here. So it also calls upon this public education. We also talk quite a bit. I think you folks are expert in this area, educationists and cross-cultural communication and training. I know this the government has started this already initiative to conduct cross-cultural communication and training for public servants. But we need to do more in elementary school, in high school, because exactly what happened. If you look at the incidences, right, a lot of them happen to younger people. I'm also thinking there's a responsibility of the parents, right? All this dining table conversation could really affect, right, the kids' attitudes and behaviors, and also the peers, right? The peer influence could also play important role. I think that certainly is very important role of the teachers at elementary school and high schools. As early as possible. I think it's better. So the other issue we talk about here is how to increase communication and awareness among general public. And the data Chenyan today you share with us. I mean, a lot of people don't believe this actually happened to Newfoundland, which is traditionally considered very friendly province, to be. And the data, hot data shows that's happening, and also the incidents that Ting and Shumei mentioned a lot in the presentation demonstrate this certainly is a serious issue. Serious enough that it call for more, public actions, from the government. I'm from that perspective. I'm pleased the current government, provincial government, has made effort and put in millions of dollars in investment in terms of helping the immigrants to fend against discrimination and racism. So this is, I think, a very important step, legal aspect, to strengthen enforcement. I mean, you have all the laws, have pay equity, employment equity, human rights legislation. Most of them are complaint based. That's big issue about. Usually, individuals don't have that much resources like Shumei. You have hire a lawyer, but a student may not afford, right, a lawyer. And all they feel all kind of revenge, right, from the locals, right? So I think it's really important. I think Amy, you are the executive of Chinese Association. I mean, we should come as a group, right, to help the vulnerables, right, and whether they are students, whether they are youth in a minority group, and provide them all the strong voice, and at the same time it has all the tools, right, and the legal channels to fight against racism and discrimination. Thank you all for the panelists. No, probably it's the time for me to open up. How much time I have? 15 minutes. We still have quite a bit of time.
Yeah, we still have some time. Tony, like when you mentioned government spend a lot of money on helping newcomers, are there any, or is there a venue that we can report racist incidences to the government to have these? Because as you said, I only settled my business dispute, but the racism, issue is still bothering me. Okay, I haven't received an apology, and I don't expect that'll happen, because knowing the person, through these couple of years, and I know a lot of local people. Well, I wouldn't say a lot of them, but it exists. Okay, so I don't want local people to feel offended that they are, mentioned as racist. I repeat this, I don't believe most Newfoundlanders are racist. And as Ting also pointed out, we have all experienced, we have met the kindest people in the world in Newfoundland. Most people are just so friendly, and nice to us. But it's those few, okay, it's those few racists that really spoiled everything. Like now, when I walk out, I am very aware of my Asian women status, okay, because of COVID-19. Sometimes I feel comfort wearing a mask, and especially in winter, put on my hoodie, right? And then people could hardly tell. But then you're aware of your Asian status, right? You're aware of that. And that is troubling. Now, we have nothing to do with the virus, right? And if some outbreak happens elsewhere, like in the US, I don't think the same degree of discrimination would happen, right? People wouldn't say, these are from American, go back to America, you brought a virus to us. But then when it happens to, when it happens in China, and then Chinese have been now victimized, right? So it's not a simple issue. So we really have to, find the roots of such racism. There's a long history.
That's right. Long history. I mean, it's always there. It's just the
Yeah,
pandemic magnified and exposed
exactly.
this social earless, right? Like if people haven't discovered all these grades for the indigenous children, right? This kind of issue sort of being ignored for
Yeah,
many years, but it's still there, right? You cannot
yeah,
deny. That's a fact, right?
yeah,
But what I'm saying here is, we need to resort systematic channels to mitigate or eventually remove those kind of social problems, right? And if you want to resort to legal channels, of course, you need to keep all this evidence, like what Tintin did, right? If you don't have the evidence, how can you fight against, right? They would just have all the delay. Even you have the evidence, they still may delay in a court. But if you don't have your evidence, you can imagine what would be the outcome, right?
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so so that's the thing. So keep the evidence and have your legal channels in hand. This is something that I think we need. The Chinese Association, maybe some other ANC could do this, right? Provide all this legal education, right? And all
Mhm.
this public awareness about what is illegal, what is not acceptable, right? So that people could resort to this legal channel to fight against discrimination and racism. This is one. The second is, to have some collective voice. I think that's important too, as you mentioned that. That's the reason why we're doing this, consultation with ANC. We also did an interview at the CBC and other places, right? To make sure this is public knowledge.
Mhm.
And then the issue here is a lot of people deny this is just not possible because we do have majority people are very friendly, very supportive. But doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I mean, the systematic discrimination certainly exists. I mean, even with all this, just forget about all this pandemic-related racism, right? Anti-Asian racism and so on. This has been in place for a long time, right? I just mentioned that, better shift we gave to locals, during the layoff, newcomers through let it go, right? The accent,
Mhm.
Newfoundland accent is part of the selection process. I mean, that just doesn't sound right, right? But it happens. So what I'm saying here is that systematic discrimination requires systematic solution, right?
Exactly.
Legal channel
Yeah.
is one of them. The other is that we have to go through this official channels. You talk about reporting to police. That's one, but also to the government enforcement, right? Of those issues. Make sure this is not acceptable. If there are people being sued, right? There are penalty associated with that kind of incidents. Then it could deter, right, further incidents from happening, right? If you keep silence, right? And if you don't fight against it, right, there'll be more and more coming into the society. So that's something that we could do, right? The collective voice mechanism is that I really encourage people to speak up, and like what Chungyang and Tintin did, and of course Xue Mei and Amy. And so, this channel also, this session today itself is also a collective voice, right? From the regional minorities and Asian, immigrants and minorities, and to speak up to the general public. That's the reason why we should have this recorded, right? So we could have more accessibility, right, to today's presentations. And again, thank you very much, Shumei, for organizing today's event, and also the TESL organization for supporting the event. I think that's already a testimony. This kind of voices, this kind of stance will actually be supported by public institutions. I think Memorial also had a very strong stance. I mean, from every other day, I saw, public, announcement from the president's office or the vice president's office about their anti-discrimination, stance and their measures, how to counter those kind of, incidents from happening at a university environment. So I think, the general society recognize this is not acceptable, right? The issue here is that either some of the undereducated groups, and Shumei, you give some examples, and also the youth who are not being able to provide appropriate message in the public school system. I mean, this is sometimes very sensitive. I understand that, right? Controversial. People don't want to talk about it, but doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. When you don't want to talk about it, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So I think that's my, opinion on this. We really have to, take this concerted effort, through, public presentation, through the media, through our research findings, dissemination of research findings, and make sure that public aware of this, and also they are aligned with our, opinions and stance.
Yeah, I particularly appreciated Ting's comment that racism statement. That racism is not born, but taught. It is true. Okay, when we know it is taught, and then we know what we need to do. We need to raise awareness, right, with the general public, and we need to reinforce the education along this line. Our teachers, pre-service, in-service teachers, and our university educators in every discipline, not just education, in every discipline. Anti-racism should be built in. We have international students in all disciplines of the university programs, and we have newcomer kids in all our K-12 schools. And so we need to have this content built into the curriculum, so we can count our next generation, our future society will be better than now.
That's very, very important suggestion now to say. We should, as a collective group, right, make the recommendation to the government, provincial ministry of education in particular, right, and how we should actually, change our curriculum, right, to include the anti-discrimination, anti-racism, especially in light of the recent events, BLM, right, followed by anti-Asian racism, also the recent discovery of the mass graves of indigenous children, right? So I think this is a kind of critical moment now, and then people realize this is not something that you can actually cover up, right? You have to admit these wrongdoings, right? From history to today, it's still there. So I think it is starting from education. I think it's really critical.
Yes, it greatly disappointed me when the two teenagers began to curse and swear at me in the Chinese are pigs. I just wonder, how did they get an idea Chinese are pigs? Who told them this? They must learn from their parents or learn from their peers. So you can see that even the teenagers have been poisoned by racism. This is really not a small issue that we can turn a blind on. So if they grow up, if the people younger than them grow up just like this, what a world will us be living in? That will be terrible to imagine. So I think measures must be done to stop the racism. You know, if our younger generation have been already poisoned, this is really a big matter.
Yeah. So keep in mind, Ting, this is the teenagers, at least testing the boundaries, right? This is, they trying drugs, the different things, right? Rebelling against the parents, right? This is kind of growing up stage. We cannot say all of them will be racism, it's just because they have tried this, right? But I think it is true. But the issue here is that when you do this, you really hurt the feelings of other people, right? Which is not acceptable, right? So I think that again is something that we should actually put into the education curriculum. But I wouldn't just say this is in a word, right? Because the younger people are doing something like that. Our future must be very bleak. But I think it's part of the process. Just think about a lot of our kids in China also, right? They also been kind of trying different things at the stage of life. So, but I guess most of them will eventually become a normal, citizen, right, of our society. So again,
we hope that such youth will not turn out to be, straightforward racist in future. We still hope, right? They will learn and they will become better citizens in future. And then, meanwhile, we also see the importance of general public education, right? Because I wouldn't say people beyond the teenager like stage, like the person who yell at me, right? Like you people don't understand how things are done in my country. That entitlement and
again, education, Shumei. I mean, education
yes,
opens someone's
the general
mind,
public, our social
right?
media, our government, we need to fight this in all fronts.
Yeah, we don't expect, for example,
anymore. There's
doctors,
no room to be quiet anymore.
Yeah, doctors, lawyers, right, teachers would commit those kind of attitude and behavior, right? So I think from that, perspective, education still matters.
So matters a lot.
Matters a lot.
Education matters a lot. Yeah. So through formal education and through the day-to-day education of the general public and raise awareness, right, of the general public. This is very, very important.
Yeah. I don't think this is the end of the world, and I don't, because my feelings are not easily hurt, And I wouldn't say that I just want to complain because my feelings hurt, because I'm more worried than scared or sad. Because these teenagers are already like this. It's not just like, okay, they're just teenagers. They are already old enough to realize what they're doing. And this is a warning to us that we need more education. We need more stuff need to be done for our younger generation, so that when they grow up, they wouldn't carry out some behaviors like some older racists are doing right now. Maybe their parents are racism, but we wouldn't expect them to go back to school and learn curriculum again. But this younger generation still have their chance, and they don't need to walk on all the paths that their racism parents do. So that is what I'm thinking. And this is definitely not the end of the world. So that's why we're still discussing here and trying to help and trying to change. And we believe that if every one of us do something, the future will be better.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the something that really worries me more is that the general education level of this province is not actually improving. I mean, we have high, dropout rates, right, from high school, right? We know that is really alarming. We also have educated youth, move out of a province, our migration, right? So, this issue is that we talk about. We should really raise the bar for education levels for the citizen, right? And so that's something I think we really, there's a lot of call, for example, like so-called green report, cutting back education services, medical services really scare me. I mean, this kind of austerity measures really, I mean, hurt, the quality of life, for example. That's one thing, but also we have pushed a lot of youth out of province, right? Educated one, highly skilled one. So I think this kind of general population trends really something I'm concerned about. Maybe it's just my opinion bias because this is my research.
So I'm aware of the time. I think on this, happy note that we'll fight together and work hard and be hopeful that our next generation will be better, and our future will be better, and we will be all part of this battle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Xuemei.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone for attending today's session. And I'd like to make an acknowledgement. And this event is offered by TESL NL and supported by a generous funding from the Public Engagement Office of Memorial University. Okay, thank you all for attending. And if you have any feedback, please email us to teslnl@hotmail.ca. All in one word, TESL@hotmail.ca. Thank you very much.
That went well?
Yeah, I think it went very well.
Let me just confirm that the recording has stopped.